Hello, everyone. Welcome to Why I Love Twin Peaks. So we're going to try and get to the bottom of that again. Whether we ever do, I don't know, because it's so multifaceted. Um, but anyway, another guest that's joining me to talk about that and many other things related to it is none other than Courtney. How are you, Courtney?
I'm doing great, Frank. It's great to see you.
And you too. Thanks very much for joining me. All right, the first question, Courtney, as I always ask everyone, is when did you first discover Twin Peaks?
So I first discovered Twin Peaks when I was in high school, and I never watched network TV. I never watched TV, and it came on, and somehow I ended up watching it. And the thing I liked about it was I didn't watch a lot of TV, but I liked that it was sort of soap opera kind of a show, but also the fact that it had weirdness and strangeness, like the Red Room. The Red Room is really what drew me in. I'd never seen anything so weird like that, and I was always from a young age drawn to like the weird, just absurd, that kind of stuff. And so that's the stuff that really drew me in was the Red Room stuff. And I ended up staying and watching it. And, when we were in high school, we had Twin Peaks, parties, watch parties where we'd have coffee and donuts and all get together and talk about the show. And it was just an extraordinary time. So when it first ran, that's when I watched it.
Funny enough, that was my second question was really, and what drew you in, when you first watched it? So that pilot, the pilot episode, um, I was going to ask you what was the first thing? Was it the mystery side of it?
Yeah, it was definitely the
First of
mystery
all the
side of
characters,
it.
all the vibe of the town.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it was I kind of watched soap operas with my grandmother too, and it definitely had like a soap opera vibe. I think that was kind of the intention. But I also like this mystery of, okay, here's this young teenage girl, homecoming queen. They find her dead, wrapped in plastic. Who killed her? I love that idea of like who killed Laura Palmer. I was in who in the town because it could have been anybody, and we were all speculating. I thought it was Leo Johnson for a while, which now seems like way too obvious of a choice. That wouldn't be the actual person. But I loved the mystery aspect of it, loved the soap opera, but really it was things like the Red Room that really kept me watching because it was just something I'd never ever seen before. And what world is that? What realm is that? And there was no real explanation for it. And I loved that too. You could kind of come up with yourself what that was.
But we didn't really see it till what was it, episode two?
Hmm.
In the dream sequence, we didn't. That was our first sort of exposure to the Red Room, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's when it started getting more kind of like out there by that point. By the time of the dream sequence, you thought, oh my God, where's this going? Where's this leading to? And,
Absolutely.
that, I think that's the moment where I've mentioned this before, but I think that was the moment where it drew me in, was the Red Room sequence. I was kind of, that's the moment I was hooked completely, from that moment on, really. I mean, I was already invested in it from the pilot. But by the time it got to the dream sequence episode, wow, there was no turning back then, Courtney. That was it, man. I was in all the way. Yeah.
We're still in all the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but were there any particular, I mean, I know Laura Palmer factors a lot in your life, the character, and Cheryl Lee too, obviously, which we'll get onto about your book later on because, I think Fire Walk with Me will lead us into that. Quite neatly, really, because you talk about that a lot, I believe, in the book. Um, but in those first two seasons, um, uh, how were you with season two? Because I know a lot of people can be quite divided about it. Some people think it lost its edge a bit at a certain point, and then picked up again when David came back. But how did you feel? From my point of view, I don't think it was ever uninteresting. I enjoyed all of it for different reasons. you know.
Yeah.
What about
I
you?
I feel the same way. I know a lot of people don't like season two or
Yeah.
feel that there's and I guess there is some weaknesses. Like I'm not thrilled about the Civil War storyline with Ben Horn, but it also is kind of absurd too in a way, so I don't hate that, sequence. Um there's so much great things in season two, like a lot of humor. I also love when Heather Graham comes in too, when Annie comes in. I think Annie is such an interesting addition. Um I of course love, the ending as well when Lynch does come back in. But I think season two has gotten a really bad rap. And I understand why some people don't like it as much, but I think there's a lot of value and there's a lot of great people that worked on not just the actors, but worked on season two as well, like some of the directors and writers. So I'm not a season two hater. I mean, I do like it all. And particularly, the Wyndham Earl storyline I think is really interesting. Annie, I love that Cooper has this relationship with somebody who's not was not connected to Laura Palmer directly, because I feel like that's a conflict of interest. And I know there's a lot of people who stan or wanted Audrey and Cooper to get together, but she's in high school still. She's too young. She's too close to Laura Palmer, and it's this whole storyline of this woman who was abused and then killed, and so. I like this storyline of Cooper and Annie, and Cooper trying to protect Annie and not being able to protect her. And I think that's really powerful. But there's a lot of like fun, silly, absurd little Nicky storylines, that I like. They're just absurd and it's fun to make fun of, but I love it too.
I don't often like to name drop, but just for a moment, I did get to know Annette McCarthy very well. She became a good friend, and I know people do give that storyline of Evelyn Marsh a pretty hard time, you know.
Huh.
Um, but as a person, as an actor, as a person, as a friend, she was a sweetheart, you know. She really was. She was so nice. It's just unfortunate that some of those characters get a bad rap, you know, um, because you got to remember when people go in, you know, people are actors, they're jobbing actors, um, so they're just looking for work. They want the job. So of course, you know, they go along and they go, oh, what's this thing called Twin Peaks, you know, or whatever it might be. Um, oh, well, I go for the audition. Um, you get the job or you don't get the job. It's, you know, that's the kind of way it works. You read the script, you do the work, you know, and then you walk away. You don't think much about what the repercussions are going to be afterwards when you're making it, do you? You know, it's kind of, you don't know how people are dissecting your work years later, you know, and so it's a kind of strange situation sometimes to be in as an actor, you know. Um,
I think that, Evelyn Marsh storyline, it's actually not, I mean, people can't stand it, and I actually don't think it's as bad as people say it is, but I think the acting was fine. I think probably one of the reasons people didn't like it was it took us away from the town of Twin Peaks. And so even though the acting and everything was fine, but it did kind of fit into that storyline, did kind of fit into the soap opera vibe. Here's this character rides off on his motorcycle. I feel like there's like a Days of Our Lives, plot that kind of followed that similarly, and and gets into trouble and has a lustful relationship with this older woman. But yeah, I've heard that she was a lovely person, and she didn't live too far from where I lived too. She lived in Encino. There's a few people I know, like including yourself, who've had the chance to know her, meet her, and I've heard keep hearing she was just lovely, and so it's sad to me that she got a lot of hate because she wasn't in control of that storyline, and I think it's because if it had taken place within the town of Twin Peaks or had been kind of folded in there, it might have been, her legacy of people loving her might have been or hating her might have been very different if the storyline was a little different too.
Although some people actually don't like, you know, the other character. What's the other the Lord, what do I forget? Some of the characters. Um, I know people were quite hating on her as well. Was Lana,
Mm.
you know, the Lana Milford, was it? Yeah.
Milford, yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
People weren't too keen on that character either, apparently. Um, you know, uh, I don't, I think maybe because they thought that she was a gold digger, you know, with the
yeah.
mayor, with the old mayor there, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that kind of like rubbed people up the wrong way a bit, you know. I don't know.
But
Um,
I think that was kind of the point of her
yeah, I
too.
know.
She looked so sweet and innocent, but she just like the town, but she had this other side to her too, you
Yeah,
know. She
yeah.
and I love I actually like her character because it's so funny watching all the men just fall head over heels for her. And there's a lot of beautiful women in this town. And she comes in and Hawk is like leaning against the door and he falls back and he's all goofy. And so yeah, there is a lot of hate for her. And I think it's just because in season two they bring in so many new characters and character lines, and I think it feels very disruptive to some people. But I love her over the top sexuality and how she pretended to be innocent, but she wasn't so innocent. She was probably a gold digger.
But I think also there were some fun characters that came in too. You know, there were some great ones, you know, some only that might have just popped up in one or two episodes or something, or some that had a bit more of a storyline thread, you know. For instance, Dick Tremaine
Yes.
springs to mind straight away. I mean, the moment he appears on screen with that smile, it's like kind of, you know, you're instantly melted, aren't you? Let's face it, you know. Um, he was hilarious, and you know, there was one or two other people that popped up. You had people like that would just come in, like do a cameo or something, but they stole the scenes they were in. You know, that's
Yeah.
quite a common thread all the way through, actually. You know, even up to season three, you might get someone who's only in for like one scene, but you never forget them, do you? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you never forget them. It's extraordinary.
And what's fun about those type of characters is when you go to events like the UK Fest or when they had it, and like the US Fest when we had it, or any events where people dress up as Twin Peaks characters, and they'll dress up as like the most random, character who's maybe in there for a second. And I love that because it's so obscure, but it's fun, and that's they're so memorable too. And so it's not just people dressing up as Dale Cooper or Laura Palmer, it's also, or Kimmy, it's also people dress up as, other sort of very specific random people. Like when Audrey was being imprisoned in One-Eyed Jacks, and they have the lady who works there and she's vacuuming. I remember I was at a Twin Peaks Fest and someone was dressed as the lady with the vacuum, or the seamstress that comes in, the hunchback seamstress, which I think is played by Leslie Linka Glatter too, directed some of the episodes of Twin Peaks. And that's like a very random, short, brief, weird character. And it's so fun to see people embrace that, or, demonstrate that, because it's so, like you said, just they pop in once and you can't forget them.
Interestingly, when I went to the UK fests, um, there was a lady there. She was a wonderful eccentric lady, and every year she would try and top the costume she wore the year before. She would outdo it, you know, she would out um do herself and make it even more eccentric. And she went one year as the ceiling fan, and she had the ceiling like rudders, or whatever you call it, propellers on the top of her head with a battery operated thing, and they started spinning around slowly above her head like that. And she had
That,
like that, yeah, so she went as a ceiling fan.
that's amazing. I love
She went
that.
as half of the horse that Windham was in, you know, that pantomime horse thing. She was in that one year. She went as a shower curtain, I think, or something one year, or something like that. I can't remember what the. Someone went dressed as a cherry pie. It was the genius of it though, you have to admire them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
made that all themselves by hand. I think that's pretty incredible, you know. You
Yeah,
have to admire them.
a lot of Twin Peaks fans are just so creative too. I think that's why they're drawn or why we're drawn to David Lynch is a lot of us are um writers or journalists or artists or just creative and crafty. And I've seen some people make some incredible things over the years, whether it's for a costume contest or just because they wanted to make something, in tribute to the show or to David Lynch or Mark Frost. And so, yeah, I think Twin Peaks fans are really creative, and I love those costume parties. It's so amazing to see what people do.
I've never had the courage to dress up like that. Never. You know, I don't know. It just takes a certain person.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just do not have the. I don't know what it is, Courtney. It's not in me to cosplay. You know,
I get
I
it.
just,
I
I
did.
admire anyone that does. Don't get me wrong, I really do.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just can't do it myself. You know.
Yeah,
Mm.
I did it twice, but I understand what you're saying. It's not something I would normally do, but I did it the first time I went to the U.S. Twin Peaks Fest. I cosplayed as Maddie because that was sort of an easier one to do because I've got the dark hair and I got the glasses and I got the big red glasses. And that was sort of an easier one to do. The When I went to the UK Fest. I really, for some reason, I just wanted something that was really comfortable, and I didn't want to be the. You're gonna laugh, but the when I went to the UK Fest for the first time, I decided to dress up as Jerry Horn from season 3 when he's wearing like the Hawaiian shirt and the beanie and the beard, and so I got the beard and the beanie and all that stuff. And there was another guy who was there, Carl Reinsch, who lives in Washington State, and he was also dressed up as Jerry, and so we took photos together, and that was really fun. But those are the only two times I've really cosplayed, and it was fun. But I much more enjoy watching other people do it or see the creative things that other people do.
Yeah, it's fun. What it's fun watching other people doing it. You know,
Yeah.
I do like it. I get a kick out of that. You know, I think it's fun. It's all part of the fun, isn't it? Let's face it. Um, but getting on to which will lead me into your book, by the way, Courtney, which I'd like to talk about, obviously. We've moved from the first two seasons very quickly. There wasn't much of a gap between the end of season two and the production of Fire Walk with Me. I don't think it was too long, was it? Um,
No.
they went into production in 91, I think, and so it wasn't too long after they wrapped for season two. Um, so when did you first see Fire Walk with Me, and what were your first impressions, if you remember, after watching it?
So I didn't see Fire Walk with Me in the theaters. I didn't see it till it came out on VHS, and I can't remember why. I didn't go to the movie theaters much when I was younger. And I saw it on VHS sometime in the mid 90s, I want to say. I can't remember the exact year. And I was overwhelmed when I first saw it. I loved it, and it was nothing like the series, the mood and everything about it, the tone. And the series kind of skirted around, what had happened to Laura Palmer. She was basically a plot device, and then in Fire Walk with Me, she became central to it. Her story did. And it was really, really powerful to me, especially as a young woman. And I talk about this in my book too, who had survived childhood sexual abuse, and nobody talked about it back then. It's hard to talk about it now, but nobody talked about it. Nobody addressed it. And here was a movie, essentially made and written by a man, along with Bob Ingalls, but David Lynch, who was telling this incredibly raw story of what happened in the last days of this woman who was struggling with abuse in her home, and how she, the mental and physical and psychological and psychic impact of that. And it blew me away. Like, I was not ready to see that type of movie. It caused all sorts of feelings. I know a lot of people didn't like it because probably because it was so shocking. And it was nothing like the original series. Like there was not the cherry pie and the cute things, and I love all those things too. But it was unrelenting in just how powerful it was in demonstrating the horror of Laura Palmer's last days.
It really was. Yeah, as I mentioned many times because this obviously Fire Walk with Me is brought up a lot, obviously because we're talking about Twin Peaks, the world of Twin Peaks, and the world of Lynch, as well. We do go up, we did talk about some of his other films as well and stuff, but um, but it is a shift from tonally from the series, no doubt about that. Um, but again, you're addressing things that are very deep and dark, you know, abuse for all intents and purposes from a parent, you know. Um, we have this other thing that's going on, this Bob entity, you know, but really, deep down, is it all in Leland's mind, this? Or is there another is there another worldly force going on? We never really do know, do we? I
Yeah.
don't think, do we ever really know what's going on there? Is he hallucinating all this? Um, is he split personality? Is he schizophrenic? Is he, you know, I mean, there's all different ways you can look at it, really, isn't there? And that's what keeps us. But that's a it's a good thing. I'm not for a minute saying that the thing that happens to her is good. Of course, it's not. It's hor- horrific. But this kind of like this kind of mysterious angle to it, because it could seem like a convenient alibi, couldn't it? That someone who's doing these dreadful things is saying that it's something that's taken him over, another worldly force, which we never really know if it's true or not. Although other people do experience Bob in their reality. So it's really, really kind of a bit of a head spinner. What's your thoughts on that, Courtney? Where do you sort of stand with that?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of discussion about this over the years. And I think as far as storytelling, I think Bob is an interesting way, especially in Fire Walk with Me. I kind of talk about it as like supernatural coding to talk about abuse, because I think if you just had like the father abusing Laura, even back then, especially back then, it would have been too much for audiences to bear. And it still was too much for audiences to bear. So I think Bob was a kind of an interesting way, storytelling way, the evil that men do to kind of draw the person in and then kind of really confront and then begin to ask these questions too. Like I think, in the original series that Leland in a lot of ways is left off the hook, particularly in the end when he dies and is not culpable. But it always seems like it was a choice for Leland to let Bob in. And we know it's a choice because, um, Laura actually rejects Bob. She doesn't let him in. She dies. She sacrifices herself. And which is a huge sacrifice because, in a lot of ways, it's breaking that family cycle of trauma, kind of a, metaphor for that. That's obviously something happened to, we know something happened to Leland when he was young and confronted Bob when Bob was flicking matches at him, probably abuse. And then it's happening to Laura. And so Laura breaks that cycle. But yeah, I think Leland has been left off the hook for many times and his culpability. And I think Bob was an interesting way to have us kind of, be okay with confronting the storyline. But I'll tell you, one of the most shocking things in Fire Walk with Me is when we see Bob raping Laura, and then all of a sudden it's Leland's face. And I think that's significant because then it reminds the audience it's not just this ghost supernatural evil. It's like it's her father. And that to me is so shocking. But I think it's also Lynch saying, remember, this is really horrific. It's more horrific than you can even imagine. And I think that's a really significant moment of reminding us that it's not just Bob, it's also the dad. Yeah.
It's a fascinating way of, in a TV drama to address just what's going on by having that kind of otherworldly angle to it, which you don't normally see, do you? It would either be a straight drama that would be literally the reality of things, a parent or a loved one abusing their child. That's it. No grey areas.
Yeah.
But in Twin Peaks, we've got this other thing going on, this possession, this spirit or whatever the hell Bob is, from this other world. So you've got a very different kind of like way of storytelling, which is probably what drew us into it because it wasn't like black and white. It wasn't clear cut. You had this other angle to it, which really hooked us, I think,
Yeah,
even though
and
it
I
was a
think
horrible thing that was happening. That other side of things was really very fascinating, that world,
absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And I think it's also the genius of the storytelling was you have all of these other characters that you care for too, that couldn't protect Laura but feel guilty about it and don't exactly know what they and so I think there's like a great balance of like the horror of the abuse, not so much in Fire Walk with Me, but the if you know the original series. Um and also these characters that we love, we adore, that are well-meaning, like Cooper. Here's somebody who's coming in to solve this case, to bring justice. And we can't help but love this guy. He seems honorable, he's funny, he's amiable, and I think it's this balance of like the horror, but also this lightness and this the goodness of some of the people in the town too.
Yeah, it's interesting about Cooper as well that ultimately his goodness, his wholesome like apple pie kind of demeanor and stuff like that, actually gets the better of him, and he corrupts him really, by getting caught out by his ex-partner Earl, who draws him in like a little, like a so easily on a hook. It's like, that metaphor we get a lot with Lynch, um, by manipulating him through his love for Annie. Much like, of course, you know, the situation with him and Caroline, Earl's wife. His guard dropped then, Cooper's, and that went horribly wrong. And now it's happening all over again with Annie. That's interesting because that's the only moment you really do kind of see Cooper's guard slip, really, from the moment he gets infatuated with Annie and Earl arrives on the scene and he's got him. He's got him. He knows exactly what to do, you know. I find
Yeah,
that was a really intriguing storyline. I did like that when Earl came into it. I really,
I,
yeah.
I did I did too, and I think he was a great adversary. It was like somebody who he'd worked with in the FBI. He had this history with him, and he also knew Cooper's flaws. Because even though Cooper seems perfect and he has this intuition and he's really good at what he does, like he has flaws, and Wyndham Earl knows that and takes advantage of that. And Cooper does, like you said, lets his guard down. And there's another part in the series that I think Cooper is one of the things that Cooper always was interesting to me about Cooper is he was so intuitive, with his Tibetan rock throw and all of that stuff, but he never really took the log lady seriously. And that is so interesting to me because I feel like she's the key to everything. And even when they're all, he and Truman and Hawk are like, going on and Doc are going to find that Jacques cabin, and they find the log lady living in the woods, and she's like, come in for tea. And he doesn't want to stay. Cooper doesn't want to stay. He's like, I got to go find that cabin. And he's reluctant, but I feel like she is such a key to everything, but he doesn't always see that. He doesn't recognize that. And I think that's an also interesting kind of flaw that he has too, is as strong as his intuition is, he's not able to see somebody else who also is able to intuit and recognize like, hey, I should probably be talking to her. And so, yeah, I think the flaws in Cooper are what really interests me because he's so likable, he's so great, he's so good, but he's not perfect, like none of us are. Yeah.
And I say it's very intriguing when he does become flawed, you know, when you do see him crack, um, and how the dangerous situation he gets himself into. and potentially other people too, obviously. You know, um, that's interesting. I like that. It happens earlier on too. It happens when with Audrey, the determination he does to get to rescue her from One-Eye Jacks, putting a possible danger there, to her life if things went wrong. But you see that determination. Um, it, it's interesting. That's the kind of moment when I kind of see a slightly different side of him. That he'll do anything for someone who he's either fond of or loves. Um, but that's the only time you kind of see him differ a bit, if you know what I mean, from his usual intuitive, very straight kind of demeanor and quirky kind of character in that. And it's I love those moments. So from the Audrey bit to the bit with Annie. Those moments are really, really good. And of course, the final bit in the logs, which is just absolutely mind-blowing, that last episode. That was stunning. As you said earlier on, Courtney, and I've said so many times, anything that's any moment I can spend in the logs, in the Red Room, is moments well spent for me. I could spend all forever in there. I just find that whole world so captivating. You know. It is so fascinating.
It really is. And it's
Yeah.
like time and space doesn't exist there. And what is this place? And, I call it the Red Room, and some people think the Black Lodge, or is the White Lodge, do they exist somehow simultaneously? There's been so many great things written about like what that space is. And not everybody agrees on what that space is. And I love that. I mean, I love that we can all like love this place that we all go to in the show and the movie. But we can't actually put a finger on what exactly it is and what the space is there and who is in it and who they are, and I love that.
So I must ask you, we'll go on to season three a bit more in a moment, but I want to talk about your book next. But just while it's fresh in my mind, um, is the White Lodge um the place where we see the firemen in season three?
Mhm.
Because it's never explicitly said that it's the White Lodge, but I think it's the White Lodge. But what do you think so? Yeah.
I haven't put a lot of stock into thinking about what it specifically is, but I think you could make a good argument that it is. It seems like the entities, Dido and the firemen, that they are really trying to do good and sending Laura Palmer into the world, after the release of Bob. Um, and it seems like it would be a place that is protective. So I think I don't have a strong feeling about if it is or if it isn't. But I think you could make a good argument that it would be the White Lodge. I think the lodge idea is, from what I've read, is more of Mark Frost thinking, kind of like a indigenous people, like White Lodge, Black Lodge thing. Whereas the Red Room is kind of more like David Lynch or whatever that space is in season three. So I don't have a definitive, it's the White Lodge, but I think you could make a good argument that it is because of the nature of like the goodness that's there and the protectiveness that's there. Yeah.
I was also thinking that the purple ocean, that surrounds the that structure that they're in, uh, is probably a metaphor for Lynch's ocean of consciousness, I would think. Because nothing is accidental I don't think where Lynch is concerned. It's all put in there for a reason. So I would think that's probably what that's signifying, you know. Um, I mean, that's just my point. That's just my perspective. I could be completely wrong about that, but I have a feeling that's what that is, you know.
That's one of
Yeah.
my favorite things about
Mhm.
season three. When Cooper goes into that purple ocean castle and all of that stuff goes down with the American girl, and You know, and we see Don Davis's like head float by Blue Rose, and I mean, all of that is so fascinating because it's like it's another world like the Red Room, but we don't, like you said, we don't know what it is. But I like this idea of like the consciousness because Cooper, it seems like he's trying to like figure out where am I, who's coming in, how do I get out of here? Is that experiment or mother knocking on the door? And so it seems like this really interesting transitional space with a lot of different symbols that we can't totally make out, but relate to Twin Peaks. So yeah, I think that was one of my favorite things. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, this season's going to be great. Even if the rest of the season's horrible, I love that we have this weird place that we get to go to.
I love that episode. See, episode 3, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
he arrives, where he's I think it was bonkers the way he was like this flying through space, like this, or wherever the hell he. I can't quite work it out whether he was in space or whether he was like in water, or it's very hard to. Anyway, it was just like going at a rapid rate, into this other world, and that whole episode was mind blowing to me. Episode 3, the purple zone, as it were, the purple world, with Nado there, the blind girl, and her trying to communicate with him, and the images are juddering constantly. There's kind of like this constant thing going on. Things are askew, you know, and him going through the electrical socket and all this time, bonkers, and his shoes dropping off at the end. I mean, it was just nuts, you know. There was some funny moments there in a way. Just the way he went through and his shoes just went dropped at the end. I thought that was funny. Um, but yeah, I loved that. I loved that world, being in that world. Again, it was a new thing. It was a new fascination, much like the say the lodge, the Black Lodge, the waiting room, the Red Room fascinated us. Now we've got this new thing, you know, which we're going to be discussing for God knows how many years now because we still don't really know what it is.
Yeah,
Um, and maybe we never will, but I mean, we'll all have our theories as we always do,
for
like
sure,
like,
for
every,
sure.
like everything else. But getting on to your book, Courtney, please, which is called Laura's Ghost. And let me get the right title before I make a fool of myself. Um, Laura's Ghost, Women Speak About Twin Peaks. First of all, um, before we go into when did you first get the idea? When did you first get the spark to write? When did that kind of like develop? When did you want to start writing books? Or when did the opportunity kind of present itself for you?
Yeah. In 2016, Scott Ryan and John Thorne and myself started the Blue Rose magazine, and we've been publishing it since 2017, but that's when we started the idea. And so I've been writing about Twin Peaks then, and I'd written before for the site that's no longer there, but it's called the Red Room Podcast. But we did podcasts, but I also contributed some writing to it as well. And so I became really interested in writing about David Lynch and Mark Frost, and Twin Peaks and kind of all of it. And so that summer of 2016, I was at the Twin Peaks Fest in the US. And Scott Ryan had a photo of several of us taken, and it was me and Scott Ryan. I think it was David Bushman who did at the time, the FAQ of Twin Peaks. Peter Daum, who runs the Welcome to Twin Peaks site, who's amazing. And then Brad Dukes, who had published Reflections, that oral history of Twin Peaks, which is incredible. And so it was a picture of all of us. And I was looking around thinking, like, oh gosh, I'm the only women that they're taking a woman they're taking a picture of. And there's people, Scott had put like the books on all the people who'd written books. And I was like, I really want to write a book about Twin Peaks. I've written about it. I've written, talked about it for so long. And so that idea of just wanting to write a book about it came to me. And then as I started thinking about what I wanted to write, one of the things at the time that I noticed was there was not a lot of conversation about Laura Palmer as a survivor and as a, well, not really a survivor, but as an abused person and the abuse that went on. There's a lot of talk about Cooper, of course. And so, and among women there was, but I didn't really see like a lot of elevated voices who are mainly male talking about that. So I was like, gosh, I feel like as a woman, I should write about this. And I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And, they always say, write the book you would want to read, because if it's not out there, just do it yourself. So I was like, I'm going to write this book. I have no idea if anyone's going to like it or, be into it. And at first, I was going to interview a lot of people from the show, like a lot of females from the show, women from the show. And then I was like, that is going to be really difficult to do because then who am I leaving out? Who am I? So I decided to just kind of center it around people really closely connected to Laura Palmer. And so I interviewed Cheryl Lee. I interviewed Grace Zabriskie. I interviewed Jennifer Lynch, who wrote The Secret Diary. And I interviewed Sabrina Sutherland, who was kind of like the right-hand woman of Lynch and had, worked with him since the original series. And so I was like, these are kind of the people I, want to narrow it down to interviewing just to get a sense of them and this character of Laura Palmer who became even greater than the people that wrote about her. Um, and then I also really wanted to know what other women in the Twin Peaks fan community felt about Laura Palmer. And I didn't go into it thinking, oh, this is all going to be about abuse and everyone, I'm only going to interview people who were abused. I didn't even think of it that way because I figured that, there's a lot of people who can, or women who can connect to Laura Palmer, even if you haven't gone through that, and 'cause she's a complex character. And so that's what I did. I went to a lot of people that I knew or I knew of, and particularly women in the Twin Peaks fan community who were creating and making things. I tried to, because I wanted it to be about that too, like not just be about abuse, but also it's empower. Like these stories are empowering, and Laura Palmer's story is empowering, and David Lynch and Mark Frost are empowering, and so I wanted to see the creative side of them too. So I have interviews, and I have some essays in there and lots of interviews with women too, talking about the original series, Fire Walk with Me, and even season three too.
The people that you spoke to, um, I mean, how did you how did you sort of come to the decision of who to approach to be in it? Or I mean, how did you go about putting the word out, as it were? Um,
Yeah, I really did it to people I knew or who had a presence, I thought. And I obviously did not get everyone in there. Looking back, I'm like, I wish I'd gotten this person or this person. So there's definitely people who should have been in who I didn't get in, but I also had to finish the book at some point too. I could have gone on and on and on. But it was people that I knew in the community and that maybe I didn't know personally, but I knew had a presence or did something creative. Like Francine, the Lucid Dream. I don't know her personally, but I know she's done this incredible burlesque in New York City and she's done some really wonderful things. And so I that's kind of who I chose. Like who did I see in the community doing really cool things or writing about really cool things, making cool things, or who had I met personally who I thought had a great story to tell. And that's how I came about it. So it's not a complete list by any means, but it was that was sort of the first group I reached out to.
so in the case of people like Cheryl Lee, who did the forward for the book as well, um, how did you approach Cheryl? I mean, how did you pitch something like this to Cheryl?
Yeah. I had met Cheryl Lee when she was doing an actors director workshop. I didn't take it, but I had met her about doing it at Pepperdine. I work at a university, and so with our film students, and so we had decided to bring her and Gary Hirschberger in with our film students, and that's right around the time that I was working on the book. I think it was 2017, 2016, 2017. And and so I gotten to know her a little bit. So we already had kind of a little bit of a rapport. Felt like she trusted me. And so I was telling her what I was doing with the book and I said, "Would you be interested in being interviewed for it?" And she said yes. And I was really happy because I didn't know if she'd want to. She wasn't doing a lot of interviews back then and she's kind of a private person and so but she liked the idea of what I was trying to do surrounding kind of female empowerment and also looking at the abuse and looking at, this side of Laura Palmer's story. And so she was in, and she's the first person I interviewed. I interviewed her a couple times, but she was the first person I interviewed as far as the people who are part of the show.
So how did you get Grace to be involved? Was it through Cheryl or
It was through
yeah,
Cheryl. Yeah.
yeah,
And I really wanted it. Grace Zabriskie besides Cheryl Lee, it was the other person that if I could ever interview anyone from the show, it really would be her. And
yeah.
I never thought I would get David Lynch, but, he might be up there, but, he doesn't do interviews. So, but I really wanted to interview her. And we had a couple of phone conversations. And then she invited me to her house, which I was shocked. I mean, she must have thought, okay, Cheryl thinks she's okay. You come to my house. But I was actually really shocked that she invited me there because I don't know if I would invite someone I didn't know into my home right away. But she was lovely. She was really intimidating. She was lovely, but I was very intimidated. She's a very small, short woman, but she is a presence, as you can imagine, like just the character she plays. And it's one of my favorite interviews I've ever done, but she just an absolutely intelligent, brilliant woman. So creative too. She's an artist herself. She paints, she makes, she draws, she writes poems, she does woodworking. She's always doing something creative with her hands, even if she's not acting, and a lot like Lynch too. And she was just brilliant. But I got to her through Cheryl. I got to interview her through Cheryl.
Going through, so when you were going through all this process, um, by the end of it, did you sit back and think to yourself, first of all, the people you were talking to, I'm talking about the people that have been through trauma. Um, when you after you spoke to them and interviewed them, um, did they find it cathartic opening up like that? Did they come away feeling that some kind of weight was lifted from them?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I think there was something to that. And I think that's kind of what the book was going to be for me. And so I think that there was, I tried to make it as, this word is so overused, but as safe a space as possible in terms of how I approached it, or the question. Sometimes I didn't know about any past trauma, and it would come up as I was interviewing them. So I did a lot of research on trauma-informed interviews and reporting and all that kind of stuff. So I tried to make it as safe a space as possible. I also I followed up with everybody to make sure that um, I had their quotes were accurate too, because it was going into print, it was going to be in a book, and I wanted to make sure everything that they said was accurate, how I got it in the transcript, and that they were okay with some of the stuff that they were talking about because I didn't want to re-traumatize them by printing it. It wasn't my goal to like, everybody just lay all your stuff out there and I'll print it. I really wanted everybody to feel safe and secure with what they were putting out there. And hopefully I did that. I don't know if I did, but I hope that was my intention. And so I think it was cathartic for some people. They told me it was. It was also really difficult, I think, for some too. There was some that said, I need to take a break for a while, or after the interview happened, they would contact me and say, I need to rest for a few days because it really took a lot out of me talking about it. For me, this whole process, writing the book, was cathartic, and it was one of those things where I had to write it. I used to hear from people saying I had to write this. And I was like, I don't, sometimes I feel that way about certain poems I write, but I've never felt that way about a book. And this book, I felt like I had to write it. Like it didn't matter if no one read it in the world. Like I had to write it. And so for me personally, it was cathartic and still is cathartic. It was life-changing for me to get this book out there.
What gave you the seed of the idea to want to address that particular subject, um, within the Twin Peaks world? What, if you don't mind me asking, what
Oh
sort of
yeah.
sparked it, as it were, sparked the idea?
Yeah, I think it was a long time coming. And in 2013, I went to the University of Southern California, put on a retrospective of Twin Peaks. It was like over a period of 5 months, like on a Saturday for 5 months. And they were showing film students, so really in their 20s, young, Twin Peaks. And then afterwards, they brought in actors and directors and people from the crew to talk about it. So it was really geared towards film students, but it was open to alumni, and I think open to the public eventually. And my husband had gone to their film school, so that's how we got on that list of information to go. And something about connecting with people, because I'd never been really part of the fan community or anything like that. I think I followed a few people on Twitter, like Welcome to Twin Peaks and the Red Room podcast, but I really wasn't plugged in. But that really helped me plug into a community, and particularly getting to know a lot of women in the community. And then that summer, I went to the Twin Peaks Fest for the first time. Um, but so all these things were happening, and I was writing about it, and I was thinking about Laura Palmer and how not enough people were really talking about her trauma and abuse. And this is something that we didn't really talk about widely in culture, as it were. And then I thought I started thinking about my own experience, that this was something, not only was what happened to me when I was young traumatic, but it was all the times that I tried to tell people. Because they always say, why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you tell someone? Well, I did. And each time I was kind of shot down, like denial, or I don't believe you, or, not taking it seriously. And to me, one of the things that came out of my book was realizing that was harder in a lot of ways. Like people I trusting not really believing me. And so I always thought, like, this is something we need to talk about more. We shouldn't have shame in it. It's not it shouldn't, the shame always fell on women, or men too, people who had been abused. And it shouldn't fall on the people. It should fall on the abuser, like that wonderful woman in France who just completely made it about the abusers. And she went public, Pellico, she went public and said, I don't carry the shame, the men do. The men carry the shame. And I love that. And so it was really about, like, let's openly talk about this, let's address it. And this character means a lot to me and to a lot of other people too. And not just women. I mean, I kind of centered around women. Men had experienced this too and felt connected to Laura. But that was kind of the seed of it, is all these things happening with me getting plugged into the community and a lot of women, and me thinking about my own experience and how I related to Laura Palmer, and realizing this is something we should really be talking about more. And I want to talk about it more. And I don't need to talk about it all the time, but I don't want to feel shame in it. And I don't want to feel embarrassed or I'm less of a person. And it doesn't say anything about me. It says so much about the people who, or person who did the act. Yeah.
Um, excuse me. Um, I think I think things are changing a bit, but it's a very, very slow process. I think people are coming forward a bit more with these kind of, uh, coming out more, rather than keeping it hidden away. But we've got a long way to go. There's no doubt about that. Of any kind of abuse, and what goes on behind closed doors, needs to be addressed. But it's difficult because it is very, very when you're the victim of it, um, it takes an awful lot of courage to speak up and stand up because you are very much oppressed by the perpetrator. They have a hold over someone. There's a lot of power involved and fear. And I won't go into any specifics, but I have been a victim of abuse as well. Um, and I'm not going to bring it up here. This is a entirely different show. Sorry, I don't feel comfortable about doing that.
Of
But
course.
I when I was young, and anyway, uh, so I know how difficult it is. And when you're from a certain generation, um, who we weren't privy to the internet. I wasn't when I was a child. There was no such thing. Um, there were very few helplines for children either to get any help or advice. Um, so you were very much alone. You went to school. Um, you felt you didn't know who to talk to or turn to, because you said earlier on, no one would believe you for a start. They say, oh, it can't be so and so that would do that. They'd never do anything like that. Um, so, and then you couldn't ring anyone up. You couldn't confide in anyone. Um, and then you go home and it would all start again. Um, you know, it was this never-ending loop of problems. Um, until I grew up a bit and, kind of moved away. But when you're a child, who do you turn to? You know, when the place you're meant to feel safe in isn't anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, that's my, that's all I can say about that. That's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, and I think, Frank, I think what you've said and even didn't say is really powerful. And I think it's a choice for people to say however much they want to say or however little, however little you feel. Because you need to feel safe. I need to feel safe in what we say or don't say. And I think that's crucial. But I think you're right. I was on a podcast recently with some women, and some of them were younger, and I was a couple of us were trying to explain to them that 30, 40 years ago, there were not resources and you weren't believed. Like, there was no one to call or report to. There wasn't the mandatory reporting that we have in the United States with Title IX and, all these kind of, rules or laws. Um, and certainly for men too. It was sometimes even more difficult to talk about these things. There just wasn't that culture of, and often you were shamed. You were the problem, you caused it. And it's really difficult to talk about that now to younger generations who have the language and they have the resources. And it's gotten better. It still needs to improve, but they have a lot more resources and a lot more language to talk about it now. People they can go to, organizations they can go to. But then they didn't. And I think that's why Laura Palmer's story really resonated with me, probably resonates with you, with a lot of people, is because here's somebody, it's happening to her. Who can she go to? And the town fails her. They should have seen. Now we can kind of recognize some of the signs with younger people of, something's happening to them. But the town knew something was wrong, but they really didn't know how to handle it or how to intervene. And so she was really on her own through all of this. And I think that's why a lot of us, especially back in the day, could relate to a character like that. Yeah.
Bobby sums it up at the funeral, doesn't he? He says, who did this? We all did. She asked for help and no one helped her. You remember, that speech he says, and he's dead right. You know,
Yeah.
even if the terrible thing about the reality really in the world is often horrible things can go on behind closed doors, and people may be aware of it, but they just block it out.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
ignore it. That's not happening. That's not happening over there. You
Yeah.
know, don't want to know. Don't want to know. You know.
And sometimes it's the people that are the predators or the abusers can be really likable, charismatic people. And I think that's the other thing people have a hard time understanding is how can this person who I know is likable, charismatic, but they're a monster, with children or other people behind closed doors. And I think that's something we need to have more of a conversation about too, that people can have different sides that they show to people. And someone you may like or think is charismatic may not be who you think they are and as likable as you think they are.
I agree, Courtney. Um, so if I may, season three, which we did touch upon earlier on when we were talking about the purple zone and Senorita Dido and all that. I loved all that. Um, but what was your impression when you first watched that first episode when it came back after that 25-year gap? And I thought, and you may have done as well, I don't know. Um, would it ever, was it ever going to come back? I never thought, I always kind of held out hope, but there's moments in your life when you kind of forget about that. and you get on with your life, and you think, oh, I didn't even think about Twin Peaks for a while. And I did go through those stages, you know. I fell in and out of love with it a few times and didn't watch the episodes for a few years and then went back to it again. You know, you go through all these kind of things in your life. And then suddenly this announcement happens on Twitter. Yeah, I remember that day really well. The twin tweets, as they famously called it, you know. And I thought, no, wait, this can't be real. This can't be real. I think Lynch is having, having a joke on us here, you know. And I still thought that until the moment that the actual first episode dropped. I wasn't quite buying it until I saw the titles come up in the music. Ah, now, yeah, now it's real, you know. But what was your thoughts? What was your feelings when when it came back?
Well, I didn't think season three was ever gonna or be made. I'm like you. When I went to that USC, University of Southern California retrospective in 2013, I remember thinking like, oh, I need to write about this because this is the last time we're gonna see these actors all together. And Twin Peaks, there wasn't like a big following of Twin Peaks back then, Um, and I was like, this is the last time these actors are gonna be together. But when Mark Frost was there, because he was at that retrospective, he said someone asked him from the audience, are you gonna do a season three? And he said Twin Peaks is a continuing story that comes from David and myself. And everyone's like, oh, but I still didn't think it was gonna be a season three. I thought maybe it was gonna be like the missing pieces, that were released, or like a video game, or a book or something. I did not think we would get a whole season three. And then when they did release the missing pieces and the Blu-ray of Fire Walk with Me, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like this is the most we're gonna get. And so I was so happy with that. So yeah, I didn't think it was gonna come back. So when it did, when I saw those tweets, and I don't know about you, but everyone I knew was messaging me, "Did you see the tweets? Did you see the tweets?" And I was so excited. But it was hard, like you said, it was hard to believe it was going to be real until they actually released it. And the first time I realized it was real, because remember there was that whole thing in 2015 of like, was Showtime going to fund, And so I didn't think it was going to happen. And then I remember walking to the drugstore where I live in North Hollywood in California, and I saw a big billboard for season three with Cooper on it, and I gasped. And that's when it was real for me. Like I don't know why it was on a billboard. It must be happening. They're advertising it, so it must be happening. And I'll never forget that moment of just seeing that billboard and thinking, oh, it's happening. It's gonna be here, and I'm gonna get to see it. And it was such a thrilling time. Yeah,
It really was. Yeah. I remember the of course when being over here at the time zones were a bit of a killer
yeah.
when it dropped. Because it was about 2 or 3 in the morning over here when they were shown, you know. So it was a bit of a nightmare to access it, you know, for a bit there. Um, but I remember though that it probably the it would have been actually, I think, the first time in the Twin Peaks universe, where it was instantly accessible, those episodes. And because of the age of the internet, it was advanced enough where we could all talk about it pretty much instantaneously with one another anywhere in the world and talk about the episode that just dropped. You know, it we were in a very unique position when this came about. You know, the age it did because that wasn't there really alive and well 25 years back. You know, unless you had people that you knew that watched it too, and then you had that water cooler moment, then that's fine. But a lot of people watched it on their own. And I was one of those, you know. So I never had the the luxury of talking about the episode on a Monday morning or wherever it was at work or wherever it was because no one liked it. In my little world, no one watched it, you know. Um, so um, this opened up a whole new world when season three came about. Everything had changed, technology had changed, everything had advanced. So now it was you know um, it was the perfect time for people to kind of like chat with one another more, and this is, of course, that's what happens. Forums, things like this as well. Meetings and whatever it might be, and it was just wonderful. Those couple of years there when it was on a high, you know, events were happening. A lot of the season three cast were attending events for the first, you know, couple of years at least. Off the back of the season. And I got to meet a few of them as well in London, which was nice, as did you. Um, and we were riding on the wave of it, and it was Twin Peaks fever for a while there. Um, so I look back on that year or two, 2017, 2018 period with a lot of fondness. I really do. I didn't watch it for a while, I have to admit, Courtney. After the first initial transmission of it, I remember though, as each episode dropped, I would watch the episode about three times within the week before the next episode. So I was watching it an awful lot, trying to make sense of it. So I did do quite a bit of repeat viewing of it. But after it all finished, um, I didn't go back to it for an awful long time. Did you do that? Or, I mean, I left it for a few years, I have to admit, before I dipped back into it again. I've only been recently doing that over the last year or so.
I did something similar. I didn't watch it for several years. Because I was writing about parts of it, I would watch like an episode here, episode there. Like I would watch part 8 because I think I wrote about part 8 at one point. Or I wrote about part 17 and 18. But as far as like the whole rewatch, it took me years to do that as well. Because it's not season 3 is not like a casual watch. It is not even like the original series. There's a lot going on in there. There's a lot of heaviness too. Not only with Twin Peaks, but I feel like there's like some commentary on where we are as a global society. I feel like there's a lot going on there that you can sink your teeth into. And so a lot of it's kind of heavy too. So I I a few years before I did a whole rewatch. I'm actually wanting to do another rewatch now because especially after Lynch's death, it's been a few years since I've rewatched Twin Peaks, and so I thought about, what if I do the original series and Fire Walk with Me and The Return? That might be a good thing to do this year to kind of revisit all of this, especially in light of Lynch's passing.
And by the way, guys, just to mention this, I will be doing a proper tribute to David Lynch. We're working on it now. And I've been reaching out to a lot of people, both people who worked with David in front of and behind the camera, and as well as fans who just love and support his work, like myself and Courtney, and many others. So we will be, going into that more then. And I've reached out, and everyone, it's a very basic format. It's not doing like a documentary thing. It's just a video, a very simplistic video with just people sending in their heartfelt messages to me, and I'm compiling it into a video so that's really the format, really. So um, that will be out. Well, as soon as I get all the videos sent, there's still time, and then I've got to get them all edited and everything. Um, but that will be out hopefully in the next month or so. So then that's when really my contribution to uh, um, my little contribution to David's memory will be there for people to watch. So that's the only way I feel I can do that. I just wanted to do something, and that's the only thing I can think of. Um, so I hope people, for want of a better word, enjoy that. Um, but Courtney, I want to thank you. for joining me. It's been lovely speaking to you.
Frank, I always enjoy speaking to you, and I think you're a lovely, lovely person. I don't think your contribution is small at all. I love that you, as a journalist and a writer, I love that you're engaging with people, with fans or people from the show, and I love that you're providing a space for people to remember David Lynch too. I think we need more of those spaces, and I love that you, and I feel honored that you invited me to submit something too. So, thank you so much for, just providing these kind of forums to talk about it. I love this, and I love the one-on-one conversation with you. I think it's really great. Yeah.
I appreciate that, Courtney. Thank you for those nice words. It does mean a lot. Um, there are other channels that do much better academic kind of look at you know analytical viewpoints about links and stuff. Far better than I can do. I'm very simplistic in my approach, I think. I haven't got that kind of analytic brain. I can't do essays. I can't. That's not me. I'm not wired like that. Um, I just enjoy talking to people. I enjoy one-to-ones like this, and to get people's perspective on something that we both love, a subject that we both love. Um, our love of Lynch, our love of Twin Peaks, that brought you and I together, and many other people. We wouldn't have known one another had it not been for that. So I've got a lot to thank David and Mark and all the rest of the people for bringing us together and connecting us, because without that, I wouldn't know you. I wouldn't know all the other people I talked to. We'd never pass, our paths would never cross, you know? So it's remarkable, really, what this show, and all the other things he's done as well, has has done for us, you know? Um, so if anything, David, one of the biggest compliments I can give him is the fact that he brought so many people together. Um, so many creative people too. Remarkable amount of people I know, you know, yourself included, Courtney, that are very gifted in their own way, you know, whatever kind of form of art it is. Um, and it's remarkable the people I've spoken to, and I'm very lucky. I think to know the people to get to know the people I've encountered, whether in person or whether online, you know. Uh, So thank you, Courtney, for being one of those. I'm going around the houses with all this, but ultimately that's what I'm trying to say. Thank you for being one of those people, one of those friends, you know.
Thank you, Frank.
And we'll be back very soon with another episode, of course. So until then, thank you, Courtney, again. Thank you guys for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this, and I'll leave you with these famous words, as I always do, to wrap this up. We'll see you in the trees.